my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies.
Do we have your permission to broadcast this interview in radio and television?
As long as you promise I get executed.
I'm not going to say the death penalty is wrong because I'm not in a position to judge it.
I'm ready to get out of here. This place is horrible. It's hard to put in words.
So I got to ask you, how are you feeling this morning? It being flawed and tainted and planted. So is Florida basically killing an innocent man?
Yes. What about the religious aspect of it, Ed?
Like I told you before, that's kind of personal.
The day after the shootout, when I woke up in the hospital, I knew.
Okay.
I'm ready to get out of this place. And I can't get anything better but a license.
And I pretty much accepted it then. I'd screwed up and I knew what was going to happen.
Have you studied, just yes or no, have you studied Satanism?
Yes, I have.
Are you a worshiper of the devil?
No comment.
Billy Wayne Coble, a Vietnam vet and an electrician by profession, Billy Wayne Coble had married Karen Visha in the summer of 1988. Both had been head over heels in love, and Billy had had great expectations from his third marriage. But his optimism took a dive, and he was soon having marital problems and separated from his wife, not long before the slayings.
Do you regret what you did that day? Do you understand and feel the horror?
I accepted I did the murders, yes. I accepted that I'm here for those.
Do you feel bad about what you did?
Well, I feel bad about
The murder of Bobby and his parents.
Yes, I feel bad that feel bad about killing the first person I killed in Vietnam. I see them just as vividly, just as clear.
Coble had kidnapped Karen Visha at knife point. He had attempted to convince her not to divorce him, but eventually had released her unharmed. Several weeks later, Coble was seen driving around the area where Karen Visha and her parents had lived. Drunk on power, Coble had driven around the small town of Axtell in central Texas in search of his estranged wife Karen, who had threatened to divorce him. Whilst he couldn't find Karen, he did find her mother Zelda Walling Visha, father Robert Joseph Visha, and brother John Robert Visha. Reports filed after his arrest detail how he shot them in their home. Coble later found Karen and kidnapped her at gunpoint after handcuffing her 3 children and their cousin to a bed.
Death. Who is not going to leave this world? Aren't we all?
Did you love your wife, Karen?
We all have emotions. And there's many different as I did the day that it happened. But I can never go back and change that.
Away with Karen in a car, but was pursued by the police, who arrested him when his car crashed. Despite sustaining knife wounds from where Coble had attacked her with a knife, Karen had survived. Whilst Coble was in hospital receiving treatment for car crash injuries, he is believed to have told various members of hospital staff that he had taken the lives of 3 people. Since his capture and arrest in 1990, Coble remained in prison and was put on the ending row in the same year. However, in 2007, the gallows sentence against him was overturned, and he was awarded a new trial. At the retrial a year later in 2008, the jury again sentenced him to the gallows. Coble spent nearly 30 years on the infamous ending row of his run from fate after the August 1989 shootings. Finally meeting with his maker on February 28, he became the oldest inmate executed by Texas since the state resumed carrying out capital punishment in 1982. Carol Cole. Carol Cole was born in Sioux City, Iowa. While his father was away fighting the Second World War, his mother had several affairs and sometimes took Cole along to her rendezvous, threatening to beat him if he told his father. Vesta was emotionally hurtful to Cole and dressed him as a girl. At school, he was teased about his girl's name by his peers. Apparently, his crime spree began at the tender age of 8, when he retaliated against one of his classmates, Duane, by drowning him in a lake in Richmond, California. The passing was regarded as an accident by authorities, up until Cole confessed it many years later in an autobiography he wrote in prison. According to him, he was primed. He had made the mental commitment he was going to get even with his mother, which became his obsession. Cole spent time in various mental hospitals over the next 3 years, where his pretty graphic, violent fantasies were recorded by his psychiatrist, and he was eventually diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. He eventually married, but that ended prematurely when he was arrested for arson. Upon his release from prison, Cole attempted to strangle an 11-year-old girl in Missouri. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He made the same attempt against 2 other women and eventually ended up in a mental hospital. It's amazing how much he could get away with in lieu of his mental illness. Cole's first victim as an adult was Essie L. Buckley, whom he had picked up in a San Diego tavern on May 7, 1971. With her, his fantasies took a dark turn and turned into a reality. Cole descended into the depths of hell, taking the lives of a number of innocents with him. Even the people who were closest to him in his life were not spared. In July 1973, Cole married barmaid Diana Faye Younglove Paschal, who was also an alcoholic. They argued and fought frequently, and Cole regularly went off on his own for days at a time. He would commit slayings while he was away, including one woman he allegedly cannibalized to a degree. In September 1979, Cole strangled Paschal to her demise, but he was cleared of all charges in her passing, which was deemed natural. His crimes eventually caught up with him, and he had to face the piper. On April 9, 1981, Cole was convicted of 3 of the slayings committed in Texas. He was sentenced to life at the Huntsville prison. In 1984, Cole's mother passed away and his attitude was reported to have changed. In February 1984, Cole was extradited to Nevada, where he was tried and convicted for the strangulation passings of 2 women and was handed down the penalty sentence. Though he had confessed to a total of 35 slayings, he was put down in 1985 for taking the lives of at least 15 women and 1 boy by strangulation between 1947 and 1980. Cole met his end through lethal injection at Nevada State Prison on December 6, 1985.
Why not fight for your life?
I just don't care to.
What about the religious aspect of it, Ed?
Like I told you before, that's kind of personal.
It is the question.
For what I did, yes, I think I deserve that. The last couple of days have been real emotionally, not mentally drained, not emotionally drained.
Cole's execution is now less than 8 hours away. From the Nevada prison in Carson City, Mark Fierro.
Scott Dozier. Scott Dozier was born before his eyes as he decidedly took a dark path. By his mid-20s, he was making much of his income from the production and sale of methamphetamine, during the course of which he would alternate between Nevada and Arizona, the 2 states in which he was convicted for the slayings which proceeded. On April 18, 2002, Jeremiah Miller met Dozier at La Concha in a motel on the Las Vegas Strip. Dozier had promised to help Miller buy ephedrine, a key ingredient in the production of methamphetamine. Miller had brought $12,000 in cash for that purpose. Upon Miller's arrival at La Concha, Dozier took his life, dismembered him, and stuffed him into a suitcase and disposed it near an apartment complex in western Las Vegas. The suitcase was discovered by a worker in the following week.
You're going to be dead in 2 days.
Yeah, I am.
Have you processed that?
I mean, as much as I'm thrashing, coughing. So actually, I was going to bring that up with my mother and say, listen, just so you know, I've talked to people. I don't get it at all.
Why do you think the country has turned to lethal injection as opposed to the other methods?
You're murdering somebody, man. It's going to be brutal.
Dozier was arrested on June 25, 2002 in Phoenix, Arizona. During a police investigation, it was revealed that Dozier went on a spending spree after he had allegedly stolen Miller's $12,000, telling his friends that he'd won the cash at a casino. Subsequently, he was also connected to the July 27, 2001 slaying of Jason Griffin Green, whose decomposed remains were found in the desert north of Phoenix. Dozier allegedly shot Green at a trailer in Carefree, Arizona, because Green threatened to expose Dozier's methamphetamine operation.
For that to happen?
I do.
And you're cool with that?
I don't care. I'm not going to get up off that fucking table.
How do you feel about the state using fentanyl to kill you?
I think it's awesome.
The death penalty?
No, I don't, though, actually. However, I think that about it because I think if there's a wrong that needs killing, if that's the answer to it, somebody killed somebody I loved, and I was sure they did it. Someone raped your sister, the only thing you do is bail that person out of jail.
Dozier received a 22-year sentence in 2005 for Green's demise. After being extradited to Nevada, he stood trial for Miller's slaying. He was convicted in September 2007 and received a penalty sentence on October 3, 2007, which was upheld by the Nevada Supreme Court on January 23, 2012. His execution was delayed by several years due to litigation by pharmaceutical companies against the use of their drugs and the execution of penalty sentences. He remains to be one of the few Roe inmates who had requested the state authorities in his own writing to act on their execution orders. Dozier had been on self-hurt watch for several months. According to his lawyers, his mental state had deteriorated due to deprivation of personal belongings and outside contact. On January 5, 2019, Dozier was found lifeless in his penalty row cell by prison officials, having hanged himself from a bedsheet attached to an air vent in the cell. He was pronounced lifeless at 16:35. Dozier was 48 years old at the time of his passing. Jamie Lurch McCoskey. Apparently everything is big in Texas, including their slayers. Jamie Lurch McCoskey is one such example. He left a deep imprint on the world, but not in a good way, and this is the story of his crimes. At approximately 6 or 6:30 p.m. on November 13, 1991, an engaged couple returned to their apartment complex from a brief shopping trip. They went upstairs to their apartment, and the eventual victim unlocked the door, leaving the keys in the lock until they could get the groceries inside. As he turned to remove the keys from the door, he encountered Jamie McCoskey standing in the doorway. McCoskey unzipped his jacket to reveal a hunting knife in a scabbard in the waist of his pants. When asked what he wanted, McCoskey responded that he wanted a ride and they were going to take him where he needed to go. The victim agreed to take McCoskey where he wanted to go, on the condition that his fiancée be allowed to stay behind, but McCoskey insisted that she come along. McCoskey instructed the man to go to a gas station and put gas in the car, which he did. 2 or 3 blocks away from the station, McCoskey decided that he wanted to ride up front in the passenger seat so he could get out quickly in case a police officer pulled them over. After McCoskey and the woman changed positions, McCoskey instructed the driver to get onto the highway I-10 eastbound. While they were on the highway, McCoskey apparently made several contradictory statements, including 1. He was going to slay the couple, 2. He just needed a ride and he knew no one would volunteer, 3. He knew how to slay people using martial arts techniques, and 4. He was doing this for someone else who wanted him to steal the car. He was obviously playing games with them for his own amusement. Eventually, McCoskey instructed the driver to exit I-10 and directed him, somewhat indirectly, to an embankment in the middle of an empty field. Apparently, McCoskey was looking for an isolated place. After the car was stopped, McCoskey took the keys and proceeded to a Suburban parked nearby to tell its occupants that the land was private property and they needed to leave. After a brief conversation with McCoskey, the occupants of the Suburban left. McCoskey returned, kind of jumpy, grabbed the victim around the neck, pulled him down, and put a knife to his throat. McCoskey then ordered the woman to handcuff the decedent's hands behind him. He then got into the driver's seat and figured out how to drive the car. As McCoskey drove in the direction of the couple's apartment, the victim attempted to tell him that the woman was pregnant and asked him not to hurt her. McCoskey's response was that he better shut up and not make him mad. McCoskey then told them that he was going to leave the victim with some friends and then drop the woman off at the apartment, and after leaving the apartment he would call his friends to release the man. This way, he could ensure that the two would be too scared to call the police. However, as they neared the apartments, McCoskey turned away and eventually came to an empty house close to the freeway. McCoskey took the woman into the house at knife point, proceeding to attack her. He then returned her to the car and took the man into the house. The next sound the woman heard was something which made the hair on her body stand on end. The woman then jumped from the car and fled across a gravel road and through a field to a nearby home. The occupant of the house would not allow her to enter, but then McCoskey appeared with a knife in hand, shaking his head. The occupant let the woman in and locked the door, whereupon she then called 911 while McCoskey fled in the couple's vehicle. When the police arrived on the scene, they found the man's body inside the empty house. The police eventually located McCoskey and arrested him. Upon his arrest, they noticed knife scabbards strapped to both his belt and his right leg. The knife used in the knifing was located a few feet away from him on the floor. Apparently, this hasn't been McCoskey's first rodeo. His first brush with the law came in his youth in 1981, when he was committed to juvenile custody of the Texas Youth Council for an unnamed but apparently serious offense. That had only been the beginning of a long and illustrious career as a violent criminal. It was followed closely by a 1983 conviction for kidnapping, for which McCoskey received shock probation. The probation was revoked later that year after McCoskey committed an attack. While in the penitentiary, McCoskey committed several rules violations, including 5 fights and 4 incidents of striking or threatening an officer, 1987 convictions for misdemeanor attack and possession of marijuana, as well as a 1992 incident of striking another inmate in the Harris County Jail with a chisel, cracking his skull. What followed were multiple incidents of violence with McCoskey right in the middle of it all. Unfortunately for his last victim, his criminal career ended with his demise with the long arm of the law catching up to him a bit too late.
So-called victim in my case wanted us to go out there so he can retrieve the money that he took from a girl that was living with. Now that I've got a date, I don't have a problem disclosing that. During the day, I would put my money, well, I get off like at 2 at night. During the night, I put my money inside of a...
So the victim wanted to go to Beaumont?
Yeah. See, I was running haunted houses. She went to the same guy that I bought dope from, weed. And I always told her to stay a couple blocks Chester drawer, and the girl that was living with me took the money and tried to double it up down the street. Don't follow me. Once she found out who I was, and she went up there the day that I was at work, he jacked her. You know what that is, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right. Said, I want to buy this acid.
As a result of his fatal actions, almost 22 years to the day of his last crime, Jamie met his maker when he was neutralized by the authorities at Walker County, Texas. A jury found McCoskey guilty of capital slaying in November 1992 and sentenced him to the gallows.
I told him, this girl is my woman. You took that money and I want that money back. So I came over there. He didn't know me at the time. Met him out in the parking lot because he just got back from a grocery store. He gave me the baloney, but he didn't have the money, but he knew a guy that had money that owed him. You know, if the inmates are going to listen to it, they don't want to listen to people that are in favor of killing them. You have 2 attorneys that are for the death penalty, regardless what they tell you, or or the civilians that are against the death penalty. I'm not like they are. I speak what's on my mind. I don't try to sugarcoat something. You're going to come out and admit it, do some research, regardless if they're in the favor of, like I've told you, I'm not against the death penalty.
The day after his conviction, after entering the courtroom, McCoskey picked up a heavy oak chair and threw it at the prosecutors. The chair flew 10 feet, hitting one prosecutor on the arm and grazing another before crashing into the jury box rail. "That's for lying in court," he shouted at the prosecutors.
Do we have your permission to broadcast this interview in radio and television?
As long as you promise I get executed, I'm ready to get out. This place is horrible. It's hard to put in words.
Okay.
I'm ready to get out of this place, and I can't get anything better but a license.
John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, the second child. Gacy was close to his mother and 2 sisters, but endured a difficult relationship with his father, an alcoholic who was physically hurtful to his family. One of Gacy's earliest memories was of his father beating him with a leather belt for accidentally disarranging components of a car engine he had assembled. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's axe, but to no avail. Despite this mistreatment, however, Gacy still loved his father, but felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. By 1949, Gacy was able to come into his own and build a life for himself with the new addition to his life, Marilyn. After a 6-month courtship, Gacy and Myers married in September 1964. Marilyn's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The happy couple moved into their new home, where he opened a club in his basement, where his employees could drink alcohol and play pool. These premises later became the site of many incidents of hurtful acts.
Way in the back of the house, in the rec room, on the telephone. When they finally walked around the side of the house, police station. Okay, well, I didn't have time because I was doing work for the county and stuff like that. I started doing painting, and then I started doing wallpapering and decorating. And inside of 3 years, 1974 became a corporation. And then I owned PDM Contractors Corporation. I owned Statement of the Police Department. And from that date forward, they had me under.
He had formed a strong foundation for himself and felt confident in acting on his latent tendencies, which he had kept hidden up till this point. Soon he was playing out his compulsions on young teenage boys, scamming them into acting on receiving his attention. Soon Gacy came into the notice of law enforcement agencies, and he was brought in for questioning. While charges were brought against him, Gacy employed criminal means to subdue the witnesses, but once again he was caught out in his dastardly designs. His psych evaluation marked him as a sociopath with psychotic tendencies with no hope for rehabilitation. Gacy was convicted and imprisoned for 10 years for the attack on teenager Voorhees. Gacy's wife petitioned for divorce and took the entire property as well as sole custody of their kids. He never saw his family ever again. Thus came the end to Gacy's story of survival and started his descent into crime. It was the beginning of his journey down a dark and evil path. His descent down the rabbit hole began in 1970, when he was released from prison after serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence. By 1971, he was once again behind bars facing charges of attacking a teenage boy yet again. With financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a ranch house near the village of Norwich Witch he used as his slaying field. For many months to come, Gacy used his residence to throw opulent parties, entertaining the rich and influential under his roof. He even made an attempt at normality by marrying once again, but it turned out it was only a ruse to throw any suspicion off his scent, and ended in a premature divorce. In their time together, his second wife had observed the comings and goings of young boys and come across their belongings quite frequently. In 1979, Gacy had a flourishing career as he worked for PDM in interior design, remodeling, installation, assembly, and landscaping. Through his membership in the local Moose Club, Gacy became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club in which he joined in late 1975, and created his own clown characters Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, devising his own makeup and costumes. That's where he birthed his alter egos, who accompanied him on a spree of crime, unlike the world had ever seen before. Gacy was unraveling fast, and the only thing which kept him from landing behind bars was that his victims were men. He had no control over his impulses, and all that mattered was that he got the satisfaction of acting on his sick fantasies, no matter what. By the time his criminal career was brought to an end, he had snuffed out 33 souls.
And that same day, they held me there for 9 hours, and while holding me there for 9 hours, they surveillance. The only trouble is that the Mickey Mouse way they were doing it, they had 2 cars following me day and night. To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies. Where 1 was under the garage. So that makes a total of 29.
Okay. Now, from the standpoint of the arrest, when you did that arrest, do you recall?
December 22nd, 1978 is when I was arrested.
February 6, 1980, charged with 33 slayings. His lawyers opted to have Gacy plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the charges against him. Presenting Gacy as a Jekyll and Hyde character, the defense produced several psychiatric experts who had examined Gacy. But the testimonies against him started piling up, and his accusers started pouring out of the woodwork. John Gacy's long criminal career was about to come to an end, and his criminal tendencies had provided him with the rope to use as a noose against his own neck. At his final hearing, the jury deliberated for a measly 1.5 hours before it passed a guilty verdict, convicting him of the crimes he was facing. At the time of his conviction for 33 slayings, it was the highest count which any person in U.S. history had ever been convicted of. Richard Ramirez. Ricardo Richard Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 28, 1960, was dubbed the Night Stalker, the Valley Intruder, and the Walk-In Slayer, whose crime spree took place in California between June 1984 and August 1985. Ramirez's childhood is considered an influence for his crimes. Frequently hurt by his father, Ramirez began developing gruesome and macabre interests in his early and mid-teens from his older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, who also taught him some of the military skills that he would go on to use during his year-long slaying spree. Ramirez also cultivated a strong interest in Satanism and the occult. By the time he had left his home in Texas and moved to California at the age of 22, he had begun frequently using cocaine, a habit to support which he committed burglaries regularly, taking people's lives in the process. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez took the life of Mei Lung, a 9-year-old Chinese-American girl, in the basement of his apartment building in San Francisco. The slaying was not linked to Ramirez until 2009, when his DNA was matched to a sample obtained at the crime scene. Thus was the beginning of a nightmare playing out in the streets of Los Angeles in the shadows of the nights. By the end of his criminal career, this infamous serial criminal had taken the lives of 18 victims.
Have you just yes or no? Have you studied Satanism?
Yes, I have.
Are you a worshiper of the devil?
No comment. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times.
What do you want the world to know about you?
The world has been fed many lies about me.
Did you kill 13 people?
It would be improper for me to comment on my LA conviction. I don't care to explain that. Let the quote stand for itself.
Are you appealing these because you say you're innocent? You didn't kill 13 people?
That is correct.
You didn't kill 13 people.
Known to authorities. Interestingly, Ramirez had been leaving a slew of evidence in his wake in the commitment of each crime, which would be later used to connect him to each of his victims. It seemed like he was unbothered by the possibility of getting caught, and in a way, he was actually leaving proof of his presence in the face of law enforcement as a way to mock them in their helplessness. But it seemed that Ramirez's time was up, and the adage that what goes around comes around was about to come true, when he tried to commit another crime to satisfy his beastly urges. This time he chose his own doom when on August 24, 1985, Ramirez traveled 76 miles south of Los Angeles in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo, to the home of James Romero Jr. Romero's son. 13-year-old James Romero III happened to be awake. He observed Ramirez through his bedroom window, went to wake his parents, and Ramirez fled the scene. James raced outside and noted the color, make, and style of the car, as well as a partial license plate number. Romero contacted the police with this information, believing James had chased away a thief. Erickson gave a detailed description of the assailant to investigators, and police obtained a cast of Ramirez's footprint from the Romero house. The stolen Toyota was found abandoned, from which they recovered his intact fingerprint. The print was positively identified as belonging to Ramirez, courtesy of fingerprint filing which took birth only a month before Ramirez was born. Now the authorities had a face and a name to go with the infamous Night Stalker. On August 29, 1985, law enforcement officials decided to release a mugshot of Ramirez from a 1984 arrest for auto theft to the media. August 30, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware that he had become the lead story. After noticing a group of elderly Hispanic women fearfully identifying him as El Matador, literally the Slayer in Spanish, Ramirez saw his face on the front page of the newspaper La Opinión, with a headline calling him Invasor Nocturno, and fled the store in a panic. The hunter had officially become the hunted, but how he was caught and handed over to the police was legendary.
And on my pending case here in San Francisco.
Why?
Because of my appeal.
But you're right in there now as far as everybody else is concerned.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough. But then again, maybe they don't. I'll tell you what, I gave up on love and happiness a long time ago. Again, it would be improper for me to comment in any regard to that question. People in this day and age are brainwashed and programmed like a computer at being nothing more than puppets. A Satanist admits to being evil.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil.
Oscar Ray Bolin. Bolin was born on January 22, 1962 in Portland, Indiana. His family consisted of laborers and carnival workers. He had experienced horrific hurt at the hands of his parents, who used to beat him when he was a child, and his mother once walked him to a school bus on a leash. It wasn't surprising that Bolin grew up frequently getting into trouble with the law during his youth, but the crimes committed in his youth were only a precursor to much darker, devilish pursuits, which eventually led to his conviction. On January 25, 1986, 25-year-old Natalie Blanche Hawley finished work and locked up the store for the night with a colleague. She left the store around 1:30 a.m. and headed to her car. Her body was found hours later by a morning jogger. On November 5, 1986, 17-year-old Stephanie Collins, a Chamberlain High School student, disappeared after finishing her shift at a drugstore. On December 5, 1986, her body was found wrapped in sheets and towels. The same day, 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews also went missing. Her body was located later that day in some woods, wrapped in a white sheet. The police knew they had a serial slayer on their hands, and only fate led them to connecting the dots and finding a connection between Bolin and these victims. In 1983, Bolin had married his girlfriend, Cheryl Hafner.
You've been here 28 years.
I've been locked up 28 years, since December 9, 1986. And in confinement.
And explain what that's like.
Imagine spending 28 years in this room. There's no way to describe it. I don't know how you would expect someone to feel. I mean, if they told you tomorrow you're dying, how would you feel? But I'm at peace with myself. I mean, as far as it's my release. We all die, but knowing your exact date and time, that's hard to deal with.
So I got to ask you, how are you feeling this morning?
A little numb.
In 1987, Bolin and two other men committed a crime together. Afterward, Bolin attempted to slay his victim with a gun, but the gun jammed. He let the woman go along a highway in Pennsylvania. Bolin was captured and sentenced to 22 to 75 years in prison. In 1989, Bolin and Cheryl Hafner divorced, with Hafner remarrying soon after. She told her new husband that Bolin had told her about committing multiple slayings. Hafner's new husband then called a tip line and implicated Bolin. More witnesses then came out to testify against him, including his younger half-brother and a cousin. Hafner testified that she had been with Bolin before he kidnapped Holly and had helped him dispose of some evidence. Bolin's half-brother testified that he watched Bolin beat Matthews and attempt to drown her with a garden hose. Bolin's cousin confessed to aiding Bolin in abducting 30-year-old Deborah Diane Stowe outside a convenience store in Greenville, Texas in 1987, who lost her life in the attack. Texas prosecutors declined to seek an indictment in the case because Bolin was already charged with multiple slayings in Florida. Bolin was found guilty and was sentenced to the gallows in July 1991 for the slaying of Holly. He later received another capital punishment sentence for the slaying of Collins and received a third one for the slaying of Matthews. Bolin was put down by lethal injection at 10:16 p.m. Eastern on January 7, 2016. He was the first person to be put down and under in the United States in 2016. His last meal consisted of a ribeye steak, a baked potato, salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and Coca-Cola, a befitting end to a violent criminal who had been the devil's minion in human form.
So you're saying you didn't murder these women?
No.
You didn't murder Natalie Holly? Stephanie Collins?
My punishment's over. I've been here 28 years now. I'm tired.
Terry Lynn Matthews?
No. I didn't know him. I'd never seen him. Never met him. Lost support outside. That's made it a little easier. But still, it's very difficult to spend. I had a lot of support. A lot of people could love me and care about me. 28 years in a room like this.
It being flawed and tainted and planted. So is Florida basically killing an innocent man?
Yes.
Earl Forrest. The incident perpetrated by Earl Forrest was one of the darkest chapters of Dent County's history, and Forrest, in every way, embodies the unleashed demons which still haunt that community. In an interview, Forrest claimed Smith didn't hold up her end of a drug deal and never delivered on her promise. That betrayal, Forrest says, is what led him to get drunk on the morning of December 9, 2002, drive to her home and gun her down in cold blood. That day had been like any other when Earl had arrived at his victim's house. Drunk out of his senses he had been, but not enough to be incapacitated. He had driven to Smith's home in the southern Missouri town of Salem and had demanded that she fulfill her promise to buy a lawnmower and mobile home for him in exchange for introducing her to a source for methamphetamine. Earl's second victim, Wells, had been visiting Smith at the time. An argument ensued and Forrest shot Wells directly in the face. For him, it had been a definite case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. After doing away with Wells, Earl had shot Smith 6 times and had taken a lockbox full of meth valued at $25,000. He had fled to the safety of his own home in a useless attempt to get away with what he had done. The first chance he got, Forrest injected himself with the meth back at his place on Dent County Road 2313. The police had finally triangulated his position and quartered him like a dog in his own home, where a gun battle between Forrest and the law enforcement officers occurred. After shooting up, Forrest slayed Barnes when she arrived on scene with Sheriff Bob Wofford to investigate the 2 slayings. Wofford was shot but not fatally injured in the ensuing gunfire. Forrest was apprehended after being shot twice during the ensuing standoff. According to witnesses, he put some meth in his mouth when he got injured.
He just started walking up and he was behind her. I went to pull my gun out and he pulled his out and we started shooting at each other. You know, they got out of the car,
crawled to the door and yelled, "I surrender, we need help, people down." Forrest's girlfriend, Angela Gamblin, was also shot in the burst of gunfire, though she and Wofford survived along with Forrest. Apparently, Forrest had been an old hand at his dirty games. He began dealing drugs in high school when he wanted to be the popular renegade. By his early 20s, he graduated to selling speed and meth up and down the West Coast. Many people believe Forrest didn't deserve any more attention than he's already gotten. He was selfish in his substance use and greedy in his dealing. At the height of the meth epidemic, he conspired to import pounds of the drug. Worst of all, he was reckless with violence and willing to slay if it meant protecting his macho image. Forrest lived his life wanting to be called a kingpin and getting respect for his tough attitude to the world. His goal was for others to label him a badass, and he was willing to go to great lengths to uphold that persona. Forrest was a fool, too simple and too stupid to know right from wrong.
She's the one that had arrested me for absconding parole back in '98. You know, I felt she was disrespecting me in the worst way. Yeah, it's not. It wasn't even about a lawnmower. It was about the fact that someone respects you, they'll treat you right. They won't try to pull any nickel and dime bullshit on you. You know, get something from me and thinking, you ain't gonna do nothing. Psychological problem with me, more than one, but you know, I don't feel things.
As a last-ditch attempt to dodge his fate, attorneys for Forrest claimed that their client suffered a brain injury years ago, and that a PET scan conducted after his conviction confirmed it. They had also argued in an earlier appeal that the scan should have been conducted before his conviction and the results made available to the jury. But the Missouri Supreme Court upheld his conviction and penalty sentence in a 2009 ruling.
Oh, thinking I could leave California and get away from the shit when I was convicted of 3 first-degree murders. Time and place, yeah, I guess so. I'm not going to say the death penalty is wrong because I'm not in a position to judge it. The day after the shootout, when I woke up in the hospital, I knew, and I pretty much accepted it then. I'd screwed up and I knew what was going to happen.
Every story has an end, and Earl's end was as violent as his life and what he put his victims through. Forrest was convicted of 3 counts on December 17, 2004, and sentenced to the gallows. Earl Forrest was the 1,436th person put down in the U.S. since 1976, the 87th person sent to demise in Missouri, and the 1,261st person exposed to the lethal injection. He was interviewed to find out whether his years on the row had blunted the brazenness of his tone and if the looming specter of demise had changed his soul. Apparently, his soul was as black to that day as it had been before. That's all we have for you, folks. Join us next time.